Good afternoon from New York City and Columbia Business School. My name is Scott Gardner, and Willie Pietersen and I are very happy to have you join us today for the 6 Lessons of the Modern Strategist webinar. But before I introduce Willie, I'd like to go over just a few key logistics for the webinar. As you'll see on this screen, a recording of the webinar will be available after the webinar, and we will be sending that to you via email. Also, we do encourage that if you have any questions, please submit those during the webinar in the Q&A box. Willie will field as many questions as possible at the end of the webinar. We're happy to receive those. And last, if you feel that you want to tweet about this webinar, please go to our Twitter handle at #CBSExecEd. Right. Willie, it's great to be here with you today. I'd like to take this opportunity to introduce Willie to all of you. Willie likes to refer to himself as a detribalized practitioner. He was born and raised in South Africa, where he received a Rhodes Scholarship to Oxford University, after which he began his first career iteration as a lawyer before moving on to his second career iteration as the CEO of such major international companies as Lever Foods, Seagram USA, Tropicana, and Sterling Winthrop Consumer Health Group. And in 1998, Columbia Business School was fortunate to have Willie join our faculty as the professor of the practice of management for his third career iteration. So Willie, you have absolutely had a very varied, very robust career, and you completely aligns with your credo, never retire. Would you agree?
That's right, absolutely. I've been a lucky guy.
That's great. So before we begin going over these 6 lessons, I just would like to ask you, why do you think that it's useful to draw these lessons from the military when doing a business strategy? How do you see these 2 domains relating to one another?
Yeah, Scott, thank you. And welcome to everybody on the seminar, by the way. Glad you joined in. So that's a great starting point for us. The truth of the matter is that strategy was actually born in the military, not in the business world. And the actual word strategy comes from a Greek word. It's a compound of 2 factors. It comes from the word in Greek, strategia, and that means to lead the army. So all the great lessons in strategy actually come to us from the military, and the business world has often not applied them very well, unfortunately. Now, the great expert on military strategy was a guy called Karl von Clausewitz. He was a Prussian general who fought against Napoleon, subsequently became the director of the Military Academy in Berlin. And he wrote the definitive book on military strategy in 1832. It was called On War.
Yes.
And the golden lessons in that book are taught in all the major military academies around the world. The interesting thing to me is when I studied that book and all of its lessons, I was astonished about how relevant those lessons are to corporate executives. And that's why I think it's useful to review them.
That's wonderful. Great. So let's get started. He provided 6 key lessons for the modern strategist. Shall we go with them one by one?
Let's do that.
All
yeah,
right.
Sure.
So let's look at our first. Number 1 lesson. To excel at strategy, we must first understand what it is. The talent of the strategist is to identify the decisive point and to concentrate everything on it, removing forces from secondary fronts and ignoring lesser objectives. You know, it seems to me, Willie, that this first lesson is really the foundation of the other 5. It's a very robust statement. So can you break it down for us?
Sure, certainly. It's a very powerful statement, actually. And what von Clausewitz repeatedly stresses in his book is that if you want to function strategically, you must first be able to think strategically. And he calls strategy actually a system of thought more than anything else. First thing we need to do is address the threshold question. Why do we need to have a strategy in the first place? And if you really think about that, there's only one reason we need to have a strategy. If that reason didn't exist, we wouldn't need to have a strategy. And that single reason is the reality of limited resources. If we had unlimited resources, wouldn't need a strategy, wouldn't need to incur any risk, competitors would be irrelevant. Truth of the matter is that every organization is functioning with that constraint, limited resources. So essentially what strategy is, it's about making choices on how we will deploy our limited resources for competitive advantage. Von Clausewitz's definition, which is there up on the screen, really flows from that very important kind of premise starting point. So let's look at the definition. As you say, it's very powerful. The first thing he stresses here is the need to identify the decisive point. Now, what is the decisive point? Well, in the military, the decisive point is the crucial central idea that directs the organization towards winning the conflict. So the important thing here to emphasize is that strategy is about winning. It's not just about participating. Same thing is true in the business world. Now, obviously, in military conflict, winning means defeating the enemy. That's clear cut. In the business world, we need to compete for advantage, and that means creating greater value for our customers than our competitors are able to do. That's what winning means in business. So that's the first part of the definition. He then moves on to emphasize the fact that everything an organization, including a military organization, needs to do is to concentrate the whole of its resources and the minds and hearts of its people on that decisive point. That's the underlying thing that drives success. And if you note the words he uses, they're pretty strong. Concentrate, remove, ignore, very powerful thing. And so we come back to choice making. And the big reminder here is that a choice is not a choice until you've determined what you will give up. A choice actually is an act of sacrifice. And the big pitfall that I think we see regularly in organizations is to make a series of choices that are additive over time without subtracting anything. And all we're really doing then is dissipating the resources of the organization, and we can't succeed that way. So the formula, I think, that comes from von Clausewitz that we need to apply, that's not easy to apply, is subtract first and then multiply. That's the rule of the road.
Right. And it seems like it's a positive spin then on limited resources.
Absolutely.
Many companies look at it as a negative. It's actually quite a positive spin on that.
You release energy when you
release
subtract.
energy.
Yeah,
Exactly.
absolutely.
Shall we move on to number 2?
Absolutely.
All right. So number 2 lesson, strategy and planning are not the same thing. Tactics are the use of armed forces in a particular battle, while strategy is the doctrine of the use of individual battles for the purposes of war. And I've over the years, I think this is a common mistake that I've seen leaders make, is the not being able to distinguish between the two. Can you provide the distinction for us?
Yeah, it's a common confusion. You know, we use the term strategic planning without thinking about the difference between the two. And the military, of course, is very, very clear. I mean, strategy is about picking your battles, and planning or logistics is about fighting them effectively. So the way to think about this is that strategy is about doing the right things. Planning or logistics is about doing them right. If you a good example here is if you were running a railroad company. Strategy is about where you lay the railroad tracks. It's about ideas. Planning is making the trains run on time. And that's about numbers and logistics. They're both important. One's not a substitute for the other. You've got to have them both. But the important thing here is that if you try and mix them together in one process, if you think about the completely different outputs, then there's rampant confusion. In fact, I call that a toxic mixture. Sequence is important here.
So I was going to ask you about
Sequence is really important. And so the rule of the road again here is strategy first, planning afterwards. And if you think about a budget is simply the financial expression of your strategy. It's not just a jumble of numbers. So that's the important thing, that sequence.
All right. And do you see companies make the mistake, and what percentage of companies do you think are doing the planning before the strategy?
Well, I'm afraid the answer is too many of them.
Yeah.
They start with the numbers, right? And then they work backwards from that. So how are we going to reach those numbers?
Right.
Well, it's not just a numbers game. It's mainly an ideas game.
And you can't play with numbers.
You can't play with numbers. Yeah, absolutely. Because it's sometimes illegal to try.
Exactly. All right. So we move on to number 3?
Yeah, sure.
Super. All right. Number 3. The strength of any strategy lies in its simplicity. Simplicity in planning fosters energy in execution. Strong determination in carrying through a simple idea is the surest route to success. Now this one really resonates with me, this idea of simplicity, and it seems to point to the intention of getting everyone on board, rallying the troops. Would you say that's a true statement?
Absolutely right. I mean, let's just think about that for a minute. Complexity paralyzes. It's the truth of the matter. And simplicity empowers. So if we think about our role as leaders, one of the most important roles in a complex, fast-changing world is to create increasing simplicity from a world of increasing complexity.
Right.
And if we can't do that effectively, we can't lead effectively. So if you think about the strategy document that we have to produce that really captures and codifies our strategy, it should never be longer than 10 pages. And if you can't crystallize it in that kind of way and simplify and capture its major themes in 10 pages, one's kind of typically lost in the jungle, and so is the whole organization. And it doesn't matter how large the organization is, or even if it's a government strategy, never longer than 10 pages. And here I want to quote Blaise Pascal, a French philosopher, who said, he wrote a letter to a friend, and he said, "I'm sorry to write you this long letter, but I didn't have time to write you a short one." The truth of the matter is that simplicity is not a shortcut. It's hard work, but it's important leadership work. Now, the next thing I'd like to emphasize here is that the final deliverable of a strategy is not just the document. The document is important to codify it and have a point of reference. The final deliverable of a strategy is actually a leadership message that extracts the main themes from that and expresses them in a compelling way that wins the hearts and minds of employees. And I think what our challenge is in a complicated world is to recapture the oral tradition of storytelling as leaders. That's the way we're able to distill and simplify, using pictures and metaphors and examples.
Right.
Those are the ultimate means of simplification.
The human side of it that people can wrap their hearts and minds around.
Yes,
absolutely. Well, and this goes back to your the theory of subtract before you add, before you multiply, because otherwise you're just adding on, and making it very hard to wrap your brain around.
Right. In fact, Scott, I would say this: I tease organizations sometimes when they make very complicated long documents. And if it's longer than 10 pages by any reasonable degree, it's really just a general anesthetic. Yeah. It puts people to sleep.
Right. Exactly. Oh, good. Let's move on to lesson number 4.
Lesson number 4.
All right. Competition is interactive, not static. Some generals consider only a unilateral action, whereas war consists of a continuous interaction of opposites. No strategy ever survives the first engagement with the enemy. And when I have looked at this one and read about this particular lesson, it reminds me of my father. When I received my driver's license, he said, "You not only drive your car, you drive everyone else's car."
Great piece of advice.
Great piece of advice.
Absolutely.
So tell us more about what this means.
Yeah, well, good. I mean, that's I see this as kind of one of the misconceptions that we easily slip into when we do strategy. Sit in a room and kind of strategize, think deeply about this. And there's a kind of an unspoken notion that our competitors are standing still and we're the only ones moving.
Right.
And if we really want to overtake them, we just catch up to them and overtake them. The truth of the matter is they're striving as hard as we are to create competitive advantage, and they're trying to do that faster than we're doing it. So in this kind of competitive game of action and reaction, we've got to remember that it is a race and we have to actually run faster. So smart strategic choices always consider the potential counter moves of competitors and how we would react to those counter moves. Always seeing the world clearly, not just through the eyes of our customers, but through the eyes of our competitors who are striving to outperform us. You know, great lessons come to us from the chess masters. These are the great strategic thinkers. And no move a chess master makes on a chessboard is ever ad hoc, just one single move.
Right.
Chess masters are always trying to think several moves ahead and to consider the potential counter moves. And they're looking at the whole chessboard through the eyes of their opponent.
Right.
And that's what makes them a champion.
Right. And I think a lot of people, it's the image of running a race where you really want to be hyper-focused and perhaps not look back at your competition. So people get confused in that situation as to, should I be looking at my competition or should I be blazing the trail? Do you think that's an
Yeah.
issue that people have?
No, that's a good point. Actually, the interesting thing is that it is about overtaking competitors, but the only way you overtake competitors is by offering your customers better benefits than they're able to offer your customers. So it's
Right.
in many ways, it's not like trying to score points against your competitors. It's scoring points for your customers.
Right.
And you pile up more points for your customers than they do. And that's what winning means
That's what winning.
in the business setting.
Right. I like that. Good. I'm glad you made that distinction because I think people.
Right. Sure.
All right. Let's move on to lesson number 5. Morale makes all the difference. War is a trial of moral and physical forces by means of the latter. In the last analysis, it was at moral, not physical strength, that all military action was directed. Moral factors, then, are the ultimate determinants in war. So, would it be correct to say that this lesson focuses on a leader's balance of IQ and EQ, in other words, emotional intelligence?
Yeah, I think that's a good way of framing it. I would say, as I studied von Clausewitz and his teachings, this is probably the most surprising point of emphasis in his book. I mean, if you think about it, war is a physical contest. It's a blood sport.
Right.
And what von Clausewitz does, and repeatedly in his book, is this emphasis on what he calls the moral factors, what you call morale or motivation,
Right.
and the spirit of a fighting force. And he makes the point pretty strongly, very bluntly, that if you destroy the spirit of your opponent's army, then you've won the war. So a very important point he makes. And then he goes on to illustrate the fact that most of the armies up to that point, 1832 is when he wrote the book, and he examined, if you like, the scorecard. The armies that were most successful were the ones that had the strongest support from the citizens back home. Right? So this is equally true, obviously, in the business world. And I think what we have to acknowledge is that every failure of strategy is actually a failure of leadership, either to set the right direction or to win the hearts and minds of employees behind the strategic focus. That's a pretty important thing. And the other factor of motivation is to make participation in the creation of the strategy as broad as you possibly can. People support what they help to build.
Right.
So I think that, back to your point of IQ and EQ, as leaders, we really lead two very large systems, an economic system and a social system. And if the one is underperforming, it undermines the other. And the one we too frequently discount is the importance of the social system.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And it's very hard to measure.
It is indeed.
And it's very hard for, it's sort of not that hard skill that people talk about. Right. So I think a lot of leaders struggle with this, and it is, important for them to learn that EQ side of themselves.
Absolutely right.
In order to get it has to be a balance.
Has to be.
Would you say it's a 50-50 balance?
No, I would actually, and that I like that. That's a challenging question. No, I think it's more like 60-40 in favor of the social system.
Interesting.
Yeah, and that's what von Clausewitz was saying.
Yeah.
You defeat the spirit of an army, and no matter how robust it might be, and no matter how many fighting people there are, that's it.
Well, and we've seen that time and time again. I mean, in history and art and everything. I mean, it's always about that part of the morale.
No great things ever happen with great passion. Without great passion.
Without great passion. Yeah. That's correct. All right. Shall we move on to our last lesson, number 6?
Yeah.
Strategy requires a dynamic process. We need a philosophy of strategy that contains the seeds of constant rejuvenation, a way to chart strategy in an unstable environment. I like to think that this lesson refers to the overall culture of an organization, the thing that gives it its life force. So what are your thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, culture shows up through behavior, and behavior is driven by business processes in an organization. Of course, what the military and what von Clausewitz always emphasizes here is that in the chaotic conditions of warfare, strategy is a process of continuous assessment and reassessment as the conditions change. Of course, our business environment is equally dynamic, and we're also challenged in this way to frequently be able to re-examine, reassess, and redirect our energy. This is a very important thing to do. And the way I look at it, this is it requires a shift of gear in the way we approach strategy, from strategy as planning to strategy as learning, and a dynamic kind of process of ongoing learning and renewal. So the big issue for me is, how do you put that into practice and translate it, as you say, into the behaviors, the everyday behaviors of our people? And what I'd like to just show briefly here, and we can discuss further depending on time available. I've translated this imperative, if you like, into a business process here. It's called strategic learning. It's a 4-step process: learn, focus, align, and execute, and then a learning loop that goes back again to the learn phase. So I just leave that there on the screen as a snapshot for people to consider. Happy to answer any further questions about it. It's been a very exciting journey working through strategic learning, and we've been together in programs on this.
Yes.
And what's happened, and I'm delighted about that, is many companies and non-profit, not-for-profit groups have applied this process with a high degree of success. But it really does come back to the ultimate competitive advantage. The only sustainable one available to us is our ability to adapt to changing circumstances. So sustainable competitive advantage for me is an organizational capability, not just a product or a service.
Right.
And that's the idea of this process, to engender that capability.
And I think it's important for people to know that there is a process that they can go step by step in an order, in a way, and have it become part of a culture.
Absolutely.
Because
right.
I remember you saying in a program one time, we want everyone's involvement, but being on board means being on board once the decision is made.
The decision is taken.
And so the beginning is to open it up, but then you come down to a more, now this is the culture, this is the decision that's been made.
So good learning is divergent. Right. And that's what the situation analysis is all about, the learning phase. And then defining our strategic choices of where will we compete, how will we win. That's convergent. It's taking these divergent perspectives and translating them into a winning proposition, the decisive point, if you like. Right. That really represents the core of how we will create greater value for our customers than our competitors, and the rest then moves through alignment and implementation. But that's the magic moment. That's the decisive point that Wim Clausewitz talks about.
Right. Well, Willie, this has been wonderful, and I'm sure that there are many questions that people have out there, and we have some time. We'd be happy to take those with you right now. Are you willing to answer some questions?
Happy to do that.
All right,
sure.
Great.
Of course.
All right, so let's see what we have out there.
Okay.
So our first question would be, how is agility relevant and the ability to update in the moment and respond to the emergent data?
Okay, I think the answer to that question is, when you say how important is agility, I would say that it's of overriding importance. Right. But, it's in a chaotic world, we have to first stop, look, and then go. So the key to being agile is an interpretive capability at the outset, a rapid assimilation of what's happening. Think about warfare in the chaotic conditions, to take stock, to interpret, to understand, and then to understand how you need to shift from one situation to the next situation. And there's never a point at which the organization comes to rest and says, well, that's it now. We've got the magic bullet and this is all we're going to do, because you have to continuously assess and reassess. And the magic lies in your ability to do that better than your competitors.
Right. It's say the quote that you think is the most dangerous quote in business.
Yes,
or in life.
The most dangerous words in the English language are, if it's not broken, don't fix it.
Right.
Mm-hmm. But the words to live by is that if we don't fix it, it will break.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's a living organization.
Absolutely.
In a living world.
Right. And that's this guy, Iri de Geus, who used to be at the Shell Company. And he wrote this article, I think, in 1997. It was called The Living Company. And he made the point that the only sustainable competitive advantage in the future will be the ability to learn faster than our competitors. And I think this has come home to roost as a truth that becomes an imperative for us.
More and more every day. More and more every day. All right, shall we take some more questions?
Sure.
Great. All right. So would you suggest any frameworks that are most relevant in today's world for strategy execution? Is congruence model still relevant?
Yes, certainly congruence model is absolutely relevant. And if we can go back to putting the strategic learning process on the screen, the congruence model is step 3, the align process.
Yeah.
Now, the important point about the congruence model, powerful as it is, of aligning all the levers of the business system behind the strategy, is you don't start with it. You start with a situation analysis. Nothing ever begins before that. That's the learning step.
Right.
And that, again, von Clausewitz emphasizes that over and over. So first we learn about customers, about competitors, about the shifting environment. Then we translate that learning into our winning proposition and priorities. Then congruence means how do we align all the levers of the business system powerfully with each other and to help drive that strategy. So that's where the congruence model comes in. It's a very powerful model. And Mike Tushman and a guy called O'Reilly were responsible for putting that very powerful framework together. But it fits within the scheme here in terms of the sequence of steps.
Right. Great. All right. I think we have time for more questions.
Certainly.
Great. All right. How do you develop strategic competencies amongst leadership to manage change in an effective manner? That's a good one.
Strategic competency, how do you master it? This is an interesting thing. I would give you one word, is through practice. And, just think about this. If we do a strategy on an ad hoc sort of schedule every 4 or 5 years and just turn around and say, let's do a strategy, might be a good idea. I haven't done one for 3 or 4 years. And then we're not going to be very good at that. The organization won't have developed as one of the great, I think it was Sam Snead, a champion golfer, said, put brains into our muscles, right? Through practice. So it's just my little metaphor is about how about showing up at the Olympic Games every 4 years without any practice and running in the 100 meters.
Right.
You can't expect to win. So we become great at things when we're able to devise a method or a process to do it that's shared in the organization. We can't have separate methods running around, just creates confusion. Shared method, practicing doing that very well. And the biggest thing to practice on it is not just to go through it mechanically, but to understand the underlying ideas that inspired the process and to constantly strive for simplicity. Distillation, simplicity becomes the key word.
And not silos.
And not silos. It has to be a shared process across, right. In other words, a core process, right. A strategy process, a core process. Yeah. Because if you think about it, it's the way we shape our destiny, the way we shape the future of an organization. Right. There are not many things that are more important than that. Right. So being able to have a shared process to do that in an outstanding way and to do it rapidly, faster than competitors, right. So we don't get mired in detail, right. And so on and so forth. But to keep moving through this cycle at a rapid pace.
And strategy in a vacuum at a corporate, at a company is debilitating.
Yeah,
the people who felt they were part of it.
Sure.
So there must be action.
There must be action, but participation is a magical way of getting when people support what they support what they help to build. As I said before, I like to quote the German philosopher Nietzsche, who said, people will do almost any what if you give them a good why. Yes. The logic of it all. Right. So this is a key thing. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, I think that's one of our first questions as a child is why.
Yes, why?
Because we have to. That's learning. We have to understand. And when it's that pure at that age, we should be doing that as an adult too.
An adult. And where do I fit into the scheme of things?
Exactly.
How can I contribute to success?
Exactly.
Right.
Absolutely. All right. Do we have time for one more question? Wonderful. All right, great session, thank you. Are there any tools, resources, or methods that you would recommend for conducting an impactful situation analysis? This is a good question because we always have a lot of questions.
We always have a lot about that.
Situation
analysis. Well, let's first just mention the sort of key aspect of doing a good situation analysis. Don't ask overwhelming questions. For example, don't say, let's do an environmental scan. What does that mean? It's like, why did we boil the ocean? So the way I like to do this is to create 4 different areas of inquiry, to break it down into manageable, digestible pieces. And these 4 areas of inquiry are about, number 1, the industry dynamics, number 2, the competitors and their actions, strengths and weaknesses, 3rd, the needs of customers, and the 4th, our own realities. And pull these together into a synthesis of insights that help to inform our winning way. I do have on my website, I'm not trying to sell anything, I'm just trying to answer the question, a workbook that people can order that takes everybody step by step through this process, including this very important starting point of doing a great situation analysis. And I think the other thing, the deliverable of this is not just data. The deliverable of this is actually insight, to see things more deeply and understand them more clearly in terms of those 4 areas of inquiry. And then involving diverse teams in each of those areas of inquiry to challenge each other's thinking and to avoid the pitfalls that happen when we think alone. And have some content experts in there, but also to have this diversity of thought, very important thing.
And without the situation analysis, it's almost impossible to move.
Right. Well, it's a blind shot.
It's a blind shot.
It's acting without thinking, essentially. That's the brains of the operation, the situation analysis.
Right. Yes. And it takes work.
It does take work, but with practice, we get faster at doing that work.
Right. Wonderful. Well, Willie, this has been wonderful, and we're very happy. I hope you enjoyed this webinar. For those of you who are interested in more information regarding strategic learning, as Willie mentioned, or looking at any of his blogs, please check out his website, williepietersen.com, or his book, Strategic Learning. Thank you so much for being with us today. We really appreciate your attendance, and I'd like to thank you, Willie. This was very enjoyable. I enjoyed myself.
Well, thank you, Scott, and thank you, everybody, for joining in. Lots of good luck to everybody.